Hello, VB. Thank you for coming. I'm really excited to have this conversation. I've been using the Codex app, now the ChatGPT app, for a long time, and it is truly like phenomenal and has changed my life. I'm not even kidding. Like it's made me such, so much more organized than I used to be. But before I get into that, could you please introduce yourself and what you do?
Perfect. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. I personally have been following your Twitter for a while, and I also had the pleasure of meeting you a couple months back. So, really, I'm quite like sort of like really happy with like whatever it is that you're doing and like all the ways that you continue to push Codex. Quick intro, I am VB. I'm part of the developer experience team at OpenAI, and I have the pleasure of bringing the magic of both Codex as well as GPT 5.6 to, developers, startups, enterprises, and just like really just, I'm blessed to sort of have this community around me, which provide us with very important and vital feedback, as well as just like continue to sort of like help me get better at my job, as well as just like share some good vibes. So that's what I do.
So with this like Codex community, ChatGPT community, everybody's pretty excited. There's just a lot of stuff that's constantly coming out, and every model like iteration over the last year has felt like a huge step up. And I just noticed this in my personal life. So, for example, this year I did my taxes in two countries with the Codex app and goals. And I did this for like a huge shopping list, a lot of money. Like I just gave it the card and had it do all this stuff, and it was way better than I would ever be at it. I'm a very like I don't know, sloppy person. I just do things, and when I was handling that grocery list, I actually paid for one of the items twice, and it was a lot of money. I just I clicked it twice. I didn't realize that I already paid, and it helped me get like a refund and deal with the this situation. So maybe you could tell me a bit about like the latest models, Sol and Luna, and how that relates to the Codex app, because I feel like these two things are really doing good together.
Sure. I mean, first of all, I think the product team, the research team, like everyone is on fire. I feel like we're like as a company, we're just so blessed that we've got such insanely cracked people who are just like singularly sort of focused on providing the best value to anyone who uses our products as well as models in whichever shape, way, or form, right? Um, I think it's good to take a minute to sort of step back and talk about all the things that we shipped just last Thursday, right? Um, so number one is the GPT 5.6 series of models, right? Um, we had those in preview for a while, and this Thursday was when we generally sort of made them available. And GPT 5.6 is a series of models. The flagship model being GPT 5.6 Soul. It's the one which I've personally been loving quite a lot, and I have been using it for all sorts of work from dev to just like really automating my day to day work. And I'm happy to sort of expand on that in a bit as well. And it's the same. It's as a model, it's priced at the same price as GPT 5.5. So you literally like get better performance at the same price point for GPT 5.6. At the same time, we realize that people might not always need like the bleeding edge, the most sort of like frontier esque sort of model for all their tasks. So we released Terra as well as Luna. Terra is roughly about half priced at roughly like 50% as to what Soul is, and Luna is about 1/5, right? And Luna is truly something that I'm using for automating stuff like just for automations and just keeping in check with either my dev server or just like simple stuff that really doesn't need like a lot of firepower. So I sort of like use Luna for that and Terra for like just day-to-day work, and so on. And sort of like as these models have become significantly better, right? We need ways we to we need ways to sort of expose our consumers to use these models better. What I mean by that is, we need to make it sort of more intuitive for developers, consumers, anyone to just come up with an intent and then pass it over to the model itself. And the way we did that is by a few different levers. Number one is the new sort of like merged product experience that we have with ChatGPT as well as Codex, right? And before I talk about that a bit more, I want to take another step back and just sort of talk about Codex in general. In the last sort of like few weeks and months, Codex, of course, has been on a tear, right? Developers are loving it. People are just loving it. There's like, as you mentioned, people are pushing it to such a large degree, not just on developer tasks, but also for non-developer tasks like managing your grocery, right? Or just like filing your taxes. And we saw the same trend internally as well, right? In the past few weeks, we saw that like 40% of people were using Codex for non-developer tasks, right? And of course, the obvious way that we thought about leaning towards this was to bring all of the magic of Codex into a more sort of abstracted experience, which is ChatGPT. So we bought all the sort of like Codex harness updates and like all the Codex harness into ChatGPT, right? And this solves two problems. One, for an average sort of non-developer person who wants to sort of live in this agentic era and to be able to use these models without having to know the nitty-gritties of Git, of pull requests, and like everything that comes along with it, it provides a familiar interface which they can still use for all of their day-to-day tasks. At the same time, for developers, it's literally the same UI, right? That they've been using. In fact, with some more sort of nice bells and whistles on top of it. Um, and like lastly, there's two modes that we introduced with the GPT 5.6 Soul model specifically for developers. Is one is Ultra and the second is Max. So Max allows you to really push the model to its extremes and really ask it to sort of ponder upon a problem for a very long period of time, right? And Ultra essentially takes the same Max model or like same like model at max reasoning effort and gives it the ability to sort of parallelize tasks using subagents, right? And we've seen incredible results from the community by essentially pushing it for kernel optimization, for quite literally training other models. We had like someone on the research team which literally kicked off the job, like one of the jobs for Luna with Ultra. So yeah, so I know like I blabbered for like a while, but I'm personally quite excited about like all the things that we've shipped so far and we'll continue to ship in the coming weeks. And hopefully as we continue to refine the product, it continues to be like more and more useful as time goes.
Yeah, this is a great explanation, man. You tied in so many like different lore pieces together. It's very nice. So my experience with Codex, I started using it when it was just the CLI, and I was using the GPT models. I found them to be like more reliable for a lot of things, and I kept pushing work onto them. When the desktop app came along, I immediately shifted over to that. And if I look at like my Mac OS stats, I could see that it's the number one like most used app. I think I have like a 200-day streak. Maybe I think today I hit 200 days. Yeah, I'm not even trying to keep a streak. It's just so useful. I really actually enjoyed the merger of Codex and ChatGPT. One of the main challenges I had to experience was connecting my phone to the desktop in like a coherent way, right? I needed to download a bunch of different apps, and it made it like a very clunky process. Recently, it's gotten really good. Like I feel it's the same experience. I can start something here, go back there. The I want to go over to use cases a little bit. mainly because my sense is that these models, even like Luna, are capable of so many things, but the harness layer itself has to extract that out of it. We can't expect people to figure it out. Not everybody's like tinkering and yeah, iterating on things. So at the harness level, you guys have the plugins, which I think are very solid. I use at least 10 of them pretty consistently. And you have the browser on the side, the computer use, and Chrome. I think Chrome is my most used plugin from there with because I could just like give it tasks that are completely unrelated to coding, and it's very good at getting it done. Planning travel, like finding tickets, dealing with a whole like bunch of issues that come with selling any kind of physical product. So, how are you guys thinking in for the future? Because you already have like all of these product surfaces that are good, um, but yeah, where do you want to take this next over the next whatever period you can share?
I think, first of all, um, I think if you take a step back around the sort of like CLI times as you mentioned, um, there's like a consistent pattern. We typically have like an extraordinary model, right? And then like product will sort of try and catch up with that, with the capabilities of the model itself. Going back all the way to GPT 5.2 Codex, it was like one of the first models which for me was like, wow, I can really push this model, right? I can like really just ask it to go for like long running tasks, go through multiple rounds of compaction, and it can truly just like do things, right? And this exemplified quite a lot with GPT 5.3 Codex, and then we brought everything together with GPT 5.4 and so on. All this while, um, like the CLI as well as when we launched Codex app, they were always playing catch up with all the features that these models could do, right? In fact, GPT 5.6 is the first time we trained the model to really understand what plugins are, how to use them in the best way possible, of course using code mode, as well as like how to use computer use in the best and the fastest way possible. Actually, if you were to just like go on the Codex app, compare GPT 5.5 on the same task on computer use versus GPT 5.6 on the same task with computer use, it's like orders of magnitude faster. That's just because the model is just inherently better at understanding both the UI state as well as how to deal with the computer use plugin in the first place, right? And I think as we continue to go further, there would be there would continue to be improvements like these both at model layer as well as at the app layer, right? Which continues to do two things, like in like sort of two threads, right? One is that we want to make it easier for both the model as well as the end consumer to be able to push these models and be able to do more from these models, right? So of course, one direction is like plugins and so on and so forth, like try and make it as much easier for Codex to understand how what's the best possible way to interact with a particular plugin, and how to get the most out of it. Second is like, how do we continue sort of pushing these models to truly run as long running tasks as possible, right? And like a lot of that has got to do with how do we make sure that the app can sustain these like long running tasks, and like how can we make sure that Codex can essentially get the context that it needs and then use it when it is the most useful, right? So that's kind of more on like philosophical level, like where we want to sort of like get to, right? um and lastly is like all of these sort of like existing features, how do we continue to make them more useful for developers, consumers, and so on. So one of the things which I'm personally quite excited about is that now in our browser has the ability to sort of interact with your own keychain with like passwords, with like all its history, can like manage downloads and so on, which means that without really use leaving the Codex app, you can have like an end-to-end flow of automating whatever it is that you want to. Like you don't have to like manually go and like put in your password for your grocery store in this case, right? You don't have to like do all of that. Codex can inherently connect with the keychain, has all of the access, and you just close the loop much faster. In fact, it's it's like one of the things which I feel like is underrated in this launch as well.
Yeah,
And
that would be a big issue that I needed fixed. Like I would rather it be inside of the app so that I can interact with the model at the same time as see what's going on. I mean, it does decent the way that it does it already, but I'm excited for that. Yeah, that seems like a great. There's a whole bunch of challenges around this because I imagine we've never had an experience where like a program can just like run around and pull from keychains and operate like a bunch of different things on an operating system level. So it seems like very new. Uh, a lot of this is like new challenges. Sorry for interrupting you, by the way.
no worries at all. I think the last piece that I just wanted to say was, with the experience for developers, one of the things which people have been consistently asking us is like, hey, like, can we edit the changes which Codex makes within the Codex app itself, right? Or can we improve the whole like pull request experience that's there on the Codex app? And thanks to Eric on my team, we now have like a very nice experience for pull request for Git diffs within the Codex app, um, which means that as you as a developer would open a pull request, you can just directly edit within the app. You don't need to like open a text editor, deal with all the nuances of that, and so on. So it's like it's of course, like, just to sort of summarize, like, of course, models will become better, product surfaces would better, but it's also these like small delightful things which just in hindsight they were like, oh, you should always like, this is the way the experience should be. So I'm like quite excited of like making the experience and like refining it in that direction as well.
So you said earlier about automations, and yeah, so there's the goals and then there's the automations. I mean, these things could go pretty well together. I think also now I've seen that it can essentially create its own threads and organize those. So a lot of people are talking about this. I think it's not very clear how useful it is outside of coding. A lot of the conversations are going back are mostly related to coding. These are the people tinkering the most, but the goals for real world problems that require, days or weeks, you can pause them and restart them at any point because the compactions don't seem to affect the models too much. So I'm very interested in that. It seems like you guys are trying to make everything doable inside of the Codex app. Is that like a direction or like a principle you're working with?
So I think it's sort of like hard to say that that's the direction, just because like with like every new model, with like every new direction, of course, what we want, if you think about it at like a 10,000 feet level, is we want the models to be able to do whatever it is that you want to do, right, in a safe and secure way. So if it is like buying your groceries from Asda or like whatever Whole Foods, like you should be able to do that. Or like if you want to send an email to your friend that you're going to be late, like you want the model to just be able to do this, and you want to consistently over time reduce the amount of information overload that is there in your brain and transfer that over to an app, right? Um, but um, but like, yeah, I think like generally speaking, for day-to-day tasks and so on, one way that I've been using Codex personally is um like I've been using it for my current, like I've got like few visa processes going on, and I just like hate it. I recently moved to UK, and like part of that led me to sort of like deal with bunch more sort of like visa stuff and so on. And honestly, Codex was super helpful in like managing all of that. Like in like one of the visa applications, I had to like come up with everywhere that I have been down to like dates in the last 10 years. Like honestly, like I had no clue, right? And so I just asked Codex, I was like, here are like three different Gmail accounts that I use. use this particular CLI to like connect with them, look through all the emails. Here's my, Google Calendar, respectively. Here's my Airbnb account. Here's, bunch of photos. You can look at like the geotags and so on. And bunch more sort of data sources. And I'm like, take your time, let me know what I should put over here. And to my surprise, it took like good solid like 3-4 hours for it to like go through everything. And at some point it got rate limited, so it like waited for rate limits to sort of like figure themselves out and so on. And to my surprise, like at the end of like the 4 hours, it had like a really solid list that I could just like put in the visa form. This, and I kid you not, if I was doing it myself, would take me multiple days. First of all, because like I would just like lose my patience, right? And this is exactly the kind of job that I would want a model to do, right? It's like this is exactly the kind of thing that I don't want to do myself. I want to like spend time thinking about a particular problem, thinking about like blue field issues, and just really like honing my creative skills versus like having to deal with like all of this like bureaucracy and so on. There's like multiple other like examples through which I'm doing this, but this is one of the ones which has had like material impact in both my quality of life as well as just like making bureaucracy easier for me.
Yeah, it's been something else because I am not very organized, and I think I've had this problem for a long time. I was going to Japan, and it's like the planning to go to Japan, figure all the details out. The models helped with that. I mean, they've been very good at helping me just do something to better myself constantly, which I don't think comes naturally to me, or most people, I think they have the same capabilities available to them. They're just not used to asking questions or like trying to explain what they want, or trying to figure out like what they don't know. Like the user experience is pretty strange. It's like the onboarding, like the model can do the onboarding itself. It can kind of teach people how to do things, but there's still something that's like a mental barrier when the answer is always just like ask the model. Like, you don't really need to Google things much. You don't need to ask people, even though you should definitely go around and ask people and socialize. I think once you learn this, it's very helpful. It unlocks a lot of skills for you. So how do you guys handle the onboarding? Maybe you could tell me a bit about that, or I could let you, if there's anything else that you would like to focus on. But I'm very curious about like the onboarding experience and anything you could share about that.
Right. I just want to like point out one thing. So, you mentioned about like asking questions and like so on and so forth. Oh, first of all, GPT 5.5 bottle. I love it. I don't have one of these. But anyway, uh, talking about like asking questions and so on. So something that is currently feature flagged is this ask user tool, which you can activate via a feature flag. But that truly gives Codex, whenever it's stuck, the ability to ask you a question. So just before this call, I was making a ChatGPT site for keeping track of all of our Codex for open source initiatives, and all the sort of like maintainers that we support as part of that and so on. And like my prompt to Codex was really like, hey, here's this like internal thing that Jason and I have. Take this and like build it into, here's what I want you to build it, right? And I want these API routes and so on and so forth to deal with it. And part of that, I wanted it to sort of like authenticate with GitHub and so on and so forth. And I came back after like half an hour and I looked at what Codex was up to. It asked me like it had sort of like figured out that it needs the answer to like these 2 to 3 questions. And the questions were like, hey, like how do you want to like authenticate to GitHub? Do you want to share this with just both like Jason or you, or do you want to share it with like everyone else, and so on and so forth? This up until last week was not possible. So the model would just like pause the turn, would quite literally end the turn and ask you to give a feedback. But now like mid turn, if Codex figures out, if the model figures out that it needs an answer and it's like blocking, it will ask you that particular question. So I just wanted to like point that out, because that's also something which like a lot of community members have been like, hey, like how do we how do we have the model ask us question? And so that's well, now possible. It's still like sort of like the team is still like working on it, but if you wanted to like be on the bleeding edge, you can still activate that feature. I have to say I forgot your question.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thanks for mentioning this. So my question was around onboarding. So when you have like somebody who isn't necessarily skilled at this or experienced with this, how do you ramp them up from like here's a chatbot to here's an agent to here's like this thing that can run for weeks on end and like do crazy things like yeah. But how do you ramp that experience up, or do you just expect them to discover this over time? Because it's a question that I have to ask myself because I am building like little trinkets for people related to this, and it comes up a lot.
I think, first of all, I love this question. I spend a lot of time thinking about how your new user experience would be, or like how someone who isn't like chronically in Codex, how would they experience Codex? Um, and like anecdotally, there used to be a lot of difference between how the experience for my Codex was for me versus of like a friend who's just trying out Codex, and I'd be like, oh, like there's like a material difference, like what's going on? And now we're trying to like solve quite a bit for that, right? And there's like few different aspects to it, right? One is that you want to sort of make it easy for a person who's just like trying out your product or like a model to be able to just like put in their first prompt like as easy as possible. It should be like as simple as just download, look at a text box and just be able to sort of like put in a XYZ and just get like some sort of response out. Second is you want to set the model up for success. What I mean by that is like you want to be able to for the model to connect to the tools where you as a user are working at, right? And so this is where sort of like plugins come in, but like this should be part of the onboarding itself, right? So which means that Codex should prompt you to connect to Gmail, to connect to Notion, to connect to Figma, or like whatever it is tasks that you do. It should proactively sort of tell you that, hey, like if you connect to this, it will help you get a better response, right? And I feel like this is like plugins in my in my sort of personal view is like the path to sort of making these models as useful to the end user as possible, right? um and so like you want people to progressively be able to connect to the tools, or if there is like a connector that is missing, have Codex like with one up, right? This is not possible right now, but maybe in the future this would be, right? um and and essentially like that's kind of what is possible within like the Codex desktop app right now, right? Like Codex will give you ambient suggestions, like here's what you should connect to, or like here's like stuff that you can do, and so on and so forth. There's the other part, which is the the first part is quite easy for like sort of like technically inclined people, right? Just because um even the sort of like understanding of like, hey, like how to connect it, if there's like an MCP, yada yada yada, like you don't want to overwhelm people with like all of this information. This is where something that we shipped last Thursday comes in, which is ChatGPT Work, right? It's essentially the familiar user interface of ChatGPT, but powered by all the good stuff of Codex Harness, as well as the models and so on, right? Um, and what that allows you to do is like one click sort of like connect with all of your plugins, and then without being overwhelmed by all of this Git nuances, all of this PR nuances, just be able to sort of get the task that you want to do done, right? Um, and something which is underrated from that launch is that you can use the same experience of ChatGPT Work directly from the ChatGPT app, right? Which means that from my phone, without having my laptop or like whatever it is on, I could just like point, like I could just be like, hey, um just look at Slack, and send a message to Chrissy, send a message to XYZ person, and summarize my meeting notes and send this summary to um, my team. And all of this doesn't, like, historically would have required you to have an always on VM or like a laptop. Now you don't have to worry about it because there's a managed environment for you, which connects to all the plugins that you've like set up, right? And it's all like one click. So you can just, you're truly like on the go. You can just be like, hey, like I want you to do this, hey, I want you to do that, and so on and so forth. And you can sort of like do that. So like that's like the second way that like onboarding has sort of changed, right? And this is still like early days, like very early days of this experience. This will continue to become better, but I'm quite excited about pushing the second one a lot more, so that we can sort of like quite literally Codex spell a lot of people, you know.
As somebody who's probably interacting with a lot of the community, on Twitter and all these like different websites, what are some lessons learned around how you maybe evangelize, this work, these products, these tools? What have you seen that like really works well digitally, uh, and what have you seen that is like not working so well? Maybe whatever you'd like to share.
I think so. First of all, I would start by saying that I'm quite lucky that I have a platform wherein I can ask questions and people would actually genuinely respond back with actionable feedback, right? I think I don't take this lightly, and so thank you so much for anyone like who's ever given me good feedback. And I think like good feedback is a reward, right? And as we start to sort of ship a lot of changes, models, product roadmap, as it starts to sort of materialize, it becomes even more important to listen in on what is going wrong with your users, right? And these could be like simple things like, hey, like I am unable to open the in-app browser on Windows, for example. Two more complex things like, hey, like the model is like after like 10 compaction is not working, right? And this is both a boon and a bane in the sense that there's just so many different things that could go wrong and can go wrong and like are potentially going wrong for reasons which are beyond product or model. Could just be like like sort of like hardware error, or just like a flaky internet connection and so on. So it's like, number one, it's good to have a pulse of how the overall community is feeling about a model, about a product, and so on and so forth, right? Second is trying to discern what could be like a trickle down sort of massive problem, which may or may not be sort of impacting a lot of people, versus taking that back and like essentially sort of like figuring out whether it's like a one-to-one issue or like a one-to-many issue and so on. And then third is like, genuinely just like looking at how the product is being used and what are some ways that I am using the same product by, versus how like someone else on my team is using the product by, or like someone on the team is using the product by, and where is that gap? And if there is a gap, trying to sort of like fill that out, right? Either by like just filling that gap on the product side or the model side, or just by sort of like evangelizing best case practices. For example, just the other day, speaking of goals, I was like, hey, like the way I use goals with GPT 5.6 is actually fundamentally different than how I would do with GPT 5.5. With GPT 5.6, I would almost never use slash goal. I would always just be like, hey, like research on this particular problem that I'm talking about, use like subagents to like try and figure out what this problem is, what's the best path, and then automatically figure out a prompt and use set goal to set a goal, right? It's the same experience, except that your goal is like quite a bit more focused, right? And the likelihood of it not veering off the path significantly reduces just because it spent that compute upfront to figure out what's the best path to solving the problem that you want to solve. And like this went sort of like mini viral, just because like it was seemingly obvious to me, but there is definitely a gap there, right? um and we see this like across, like there are just like, for example, something that I've observed is that not a lot of people know about the fact that you can now edit files directly in the diff mode or in the PR mode, right? So it's more like trying to figure out like what are some things that I'm already using and that could like benefit the community writ large, right? And last but not the least is just like really just like spending some time like talking to them, like, hey, like how are you using this model? Like, hey, like what are some ways that it's just like let you down, right? And then I have this like massive Google Doc wherein I keep adding things, and like Codex keeps reminding me, or like, oh, like this particular issue is like related, like maybe like you can open a pull request for this, or like maybe you can like bring this up to the team again, and so on. So it's by no means perfect, but that's kind of like how I've been operating in the past couple of weeks.
So I am really grateful for your time. I'm happy I got to ask these questions live. Yeah, I have one last like maybe topic of discussion. So one thing that I really like about your team on Twitter is that you're asking for feedback, and I can see that this feedback is being implemented on a very decent time span. Um, and recently, I don't know if it was Tebow or Sam Altman that posted about like what do you want to see in the next version of models? Like my question is like, what do you want to see in the next version of models? I can share like a tidbit. So I use them a lot for managing. I'm building my own like compute in my house, and I use them for managing like these fleets of computers and all these different problems. And I find them to be like almost perfect at this stuff, but there are still just these hard walls and like basic things that they get wrong that turns out to be expensive. So I'll give you an example. If you ask a model to benchmark another model without explicitly telling it like what parameters you want, it'll typically like put 64, I don't know, max tokens for the response, which doesn't make sense, right? It basically and it'll spend all this compute on something that is going to fail from the start. Now, this isn't a problem with like the OpenAI model specifically. It seems to be all of them have these issues, but there are these like logical things that might seem obvious, or time estimation. This is the second one. Is like they'll tell you it's going to take 2 weeks to build something, then they build it in an hour. So it's like unreasonable time, planning estimations. But maybe that's because they're so great they broke what would be expected. So I want to pass it on to you. Like, are there any things that you want to see in the next model?
Yeah, I mean, I think personally, and again, I have no clue if the research team is working on this or not. But personally, what I would love for these models to become really good at is maintaining a good log of what they've done so far and sort of like learn from that. We've got memories in sort of like experimental beta, right? And it's like, I want the model to learn from me. Like, in fact, I want it to proactively ask me question after a turn and just be like, hey, like, was this the intended way that you wanted to do things? And then just like learn that and never ever bother me with like a, unintended path. So to answer your question, like on the GPU fleet thing that you had, right? If it made a mistake once, like I want the model to like immediately after making the mistake learn that this is not a good mistake, right? And then sort of like like fix that essentially. Second is just generally as it comes for like really truly long running tasks. This is sort of like intertwined with the first thing which I mentioned. I've got some threads which are running for 2 months now, right? There is this thread which would just like continue, like I've got some goals, and every day at the start of the day I would just be like, hey, like these are the things that I am like most sort of excited about, or I want to get through this. For example, this morning I was like, hey, like I'm catching up with you and I want to get like some quick talking points, and I want to just like, essentially be prepared for what are the things which I am excited about, and like I want to like make sure that I communicate to you, right? Um, and similarly there were like a bunch of other things and so on, and these threads have of course been running for like a very long time, and it's like it's feasible to sort of like open them on the Mac that I have, right? But probably not for like a starter Mac, for example. And so like optimizing that at like a product level, like just be able to like have like truly long running tasks which like continue running in the background, and like every now and then surface and say like, hey, you should like look at this, hey, like this is something that you should like look into, or and that experience I'm quite sort of, I would love for it to become like significantly better. I think lastly would be the ability for the model as well as like the app itself to get very good at figuring out when something should be a loop, and not like loop and like like the high p sense, but like loop literally in the sense of like a heartbeat. Like when is it that you want the model to like just set up a heartbeat and like continue sort of polling a particular task that it's doing, and when not, right? For example, um if I'm if I've opened a PR, like I have this in my agents.md that like the model should like open a heartbeat and like monitor until the CI is happy, and then just mark and approve, and then put it into the merge queue and so on. This is like a very simple verifiable task. But then there are like quite a lot of open-ended tasks. Like if I'm awaiting a response from my lawyers, right? I want the model to be able to like figure out that I am awaiting a response from my lawyers, and like continue to have like a loop or like a heartbeat, and it would like proactively sort of follow up and so on. So I feel like it's like the proactivity and the interactivity with these like long running ambient sort of agents, which are just like chilling about and gathering context and surfacing themselves as and when needed. That's something which I'm quite excited about personally.
VB, thank you so much. I am also very excited about this. I know you guys are going to pull it off. I mean, there's so much to learn from the product sense that you guys have. It's really inspiring. Um, yeah, I'm very grateful for your time. Hopefully, we can do this again sometime. Is there anything else that you want to add before we wrap this one up?
I think very last quick things. If you haven't already, go on chatgpt.com/codex or openai.com/codex. Sorry, I had one job. But no, go on openai.com/codex, download the app, try it out. And if you have any feedback, really just like go on Twitter, go on at reach_VB, tag me. I will listen to it, and I will, try and solve that problem as soon as possible. And yeah, like models right now are pretty capable, and they can do a lot of things. All you need to do is just ask. And all I ask of anyone who's listening this is to download Codex and ask.
Yeah,
Thank you
I
so
think
much.
it'll help a lot of people. Thank you so much, dude. Yeah, complaining on Twitter. I always tell people if you have feedback, just go on Twitter and post it. It doesn't matter how many followers you have. Post it, tag people, and eventually it'll get resolved. Thank you again. And yeah, I'm going to